Hello, and welcome to the Sacred Heart Shaman Podcast, where we talk about spiritual healing, shamanic wisdom, and the challenges of walking the healer's path. My name is Nadia Harenku, and today is episode number 14, Shamanic Encounters with Psychosis. Good morning, and thank you for joining me today. We are talking about psychosis. So I wanted to bring this to the table because it's one of the more obscure things that I know how to work with to whatever extent we can know how to work with things as practitioners. It's a constant state of learning and unfolding in our work, and we only encounter the things we need to know and learn as we need to know and learn them. And today I'm going to share about my experience with psychosis, both personally and professionally, and hope that it provides some insight or wisdom for those who need it. So, I'm going to talk about personal experience first. In my personal life, I have encountered psychosis in a few different ways. And what this kind of feels like is things feeling unhinged, this sensation of I'm about to lose my shit at any moment, but not in like the normal way, in like the, oh God, I'm about to lose touch with reality kind of way. So a little bit different than overwhelm, though not entirely, because these two things are connected. And I'm going to go more into that today. So I've never personally gone into a full psychosis, but I can feel it when I'm coming up on the edge. It means that I'm about to go through a major expansion, and the walls or like parameters of my mind, of my beliefs, of my paradigm or my world are about to blow open. So it means I'm going through an expansion, which is really cool, and also on a very big level. And I think a lot of other people in my position, some of the shamanic practitioners and shamans that I train, definitely have this experience as well. For me, it happens every 6 to 12 months. It can last a couple days to a couple weeks. I think the longest has been 4 weeks. Um, and I'm always just kind of on the edge of, oh God, I feel like my psyche is about to break. I feel like I'm losing my grip on reality. For example, last year, the year before, I went to go I went to go see The Matrix, the new Matrix movie. And it's funny because movies can set these things off. When we're exposed to a concept, we are given the option to open up the potential for that concept to exist in our world almost immediately. And as a shaman, that happens much faster and more smoothly than I think other people. So I have to be very careful about what I put in my body, like media wise, movies. I can't watch horror movies. I will manifest whatever it is almost immediately into existence or tune into the energy and it will draw it to me or open that door for me. So this happened when I saw the new Matrix movie a few years ago. I went to the movie theater with my family, and the movie theater is a very intense experience for me anyway. But there was something about that movie that broke open my current paradigm. And I mean, it's not a new concept, right? Like, we've all seen The Matrix. I love the concept. It's a really great metaphor for 3D Earth. But there was something about that movie that made me feel like, oh shit, my reality is about to crack open, blow out, and expand to a new level. And I stayed in that space for 2 or 3 weeks. And then on the other side of it, I could feel the expansiveness of that growth that had been triggered by this new concept of, whatever it was in that movie that broke open a new door or a new wall for me. Um, this is interesting and you know, kind of fascinating to experience on a personal level because of the work that I do and the clients that I see. And I found it to be very helpful. I also found that I can't factor stuff like this into my pay rate. I don't know how to do that. Um, but this is part of the shaman process. It's to always be expanding and growing. And I'm pretty sure it's going to happen until the day that I die. So personal brushes with psychosis every 6 to 12 months. Um, First, I'm going to talk about how I've experienced this with regular clients, like shamanic healing kind of clients, and then I'm going to talk about the plant medicine space, which is kind of separate but kind of metaphorical for regular life. So, with my normal clients or my potential clients, I notice that people reach out to me when they're in a state of psychosis, and it is because they can see me. It's like being a beacon in a land of chaos or darkness or confusion. A lot of people reach out to me while they're in psychosis to touch in because I have something that they need, because I have a key word or an anchor that helps bring them back. Um, and providing them with guidance on how to anchor in. So sometimes these people become my clients, sometimes they just need to like literally touch me energetically and it helps them in some way. Um, when I'm working with someone who has psychosis episodes, a lot of this is about learning grounding practices and navigating trauma healing, learning shamanic practices, because it does mean that they have the ability to go in and out of this world. It typically means that they're just not anchored here. So for me, I'm very anchored in the 3D, but I'm also anchored in the other world. And people who end up in psychosis don't have that 3D anchor. And there's a reason for that. It's usually trauma. Occasionally it's biological, and their psychosis episodes are more of a lesson for the people around them. But typically it's trauma related, and it needs to be addressed in the same way that we would address any trauma healing. Um, so that's really interesting. And this psychosis that I'm talking about is also very distinctly different from things like dissociative identity disorder. I would not put that in the psychosis category. DID is one of my favorite things to talk about and to work with clients. We all have multiple personalities. We all have many, many, many parts, and it exists on a spectrum, right? So for me, like I'm way on one hand of the spectrum where it's very fluid and each part has a lot of power, but they can talk to each other. I can literally like put them in front of each other on a table and they will have a conversation. And it's not an issue for me to kind of be like the governor of the Nadias and mediate conversations and healing. And then people who have dissociative identity disorder or related disorders have distinct walls between their identities, so they can't really talk to each other yet. And again, that's for trauma reasons. I think you're going to notice as I talk about things in the podcast that a lot of quote unquote issues or mental illness or regular illness goes back to trauma, something that happened to us that caused us to create whatever thing that we're dealing with, such as psychosis, such as dissociative identity disorder. So the third thing I want to talk about is psychosis in the ceremony space. When I say ceremony space, I am typically talking about like any shamanic ceremony, an altered state of consciousness, trance state, a space of intentional work, healing work. Today, we're going to talk about ceremony space with regards to plant medicine. So, in the plant medicine space, mushrooms are the plant spirit that I work with the most. Fungi spirit, I don't know if you want to put those into separate categories. They're the spirit that I work with the most. They are most comfortable with the shamanic work that I do. And so I have a lot of experience helping people navigate that space and integrating and preparing for it. So I want to talk about how psychosis shows up in that space because that is the most frequent. And really, what mushrooms are doing are amplifying what's already there. So if you already have a tendency to have psychosis or it's a psychotic break that you need in order to heal, the mushrooms will take you there. And this is one of the benefits of working with a shaman, is like being able to understand and identify things like that and hold proper container for it so that you are not scarred by the experience, so that you do come back fully. Um, so yeah, let's dive into that. So as a shaman, my job is always, always, always to hold a loving container and to anchor you into yourself and into the space. This is especially true when we're talking about plant medicine work, because let's face it, if I panic, you're going to panic. And so it's really important to feel like grounded and confident and to just be able to have no judgment and hold that loving space for someone as they go through any process, especially plant medicine, because you can feel all the subtleties, right? If you're experiencing Nadia on a multidimensional level, you're experiencing 1,000 different aspects of me. And it means that my intentions and skills must be grounded and pure and based in love, or you're going to pick up on it. And this is the fact with working with psychedelics is you're going to pick up on everything. Um, and that's why the container for how you work with them is so important. So, the first case in which psychosis comes up is when a person is not from here and they are actively avoiding their own healing work. They will attempt to disconnect from their body and go into the astral. This can be super dangerous and it can be really hard to get them back. So, I'm gonna kind of cite two examples. I have one person who's an extremely magical person that I worked with, very gifted, someone that I really enjoy on a human level, had a really hard time doing their own childhood work and their own shadow work. Like, did not like working in the shadows, which I understand. That stuff is heavy, it's very unpleasant. Nobody really likes it. That's where I live, so I don't really have a huge issue looking at it. But we actually had to bring in a second practitioner to do this ceremony because the spirits were telling me that this person was going to have a really hard time doing their shadow work. So we had to have a shaman in the room who worked with astral. So out there, all the fun, party, high vibration, extraterrestrial stuff. And then me, which works down there, like in the shadows, in the other worlds. Just a different spectrum. And if we wanted her to be able to come back to the room, we had to have a balance of both. And that was, I mean, this is why it's good to work with the spirits, right? You get a heads up of like, okay, this is what we're going to work with. This is how you mitigate any issues. And so I got told up front that both of us, that two practitioners were going to need to be there for the experience. The second example I have is just someone who was really in touch with extraterrestrial energy. So she was always pulled out there. Um, she had a great gift to channel it into this world, but struggled to be in this world fully due to not being able to face trauma. Um, and so whenever she would work with a plant medicine, it would send her into psychosis because she wasn't quite doing the work to be able to clear out the trauma. I don't know if you can hear my dog playing with the squeaky toy in the background. Sorry. Side note. Um, so we had to be really careful with the plant medicine because it kept sending her into a psychotic state and she was having trouble coming back. And that was due to the lack of ability to process the trauma for multiple reasons. I mean, maybe it wasn't time. Maybe she didn't find the right modality. Um, Maybe it was too much all at once. I'm not really sure. And I had to advise her not to work with plant medicine anymore. Unfortunately, she didn't take my advice and ended up in an extended state of psychosis. But that's one of the risks that you have when you're a very astral person. Working with a psychedelic is it can be very risky, and coming back can be very real. And again, that's why you work with practitioners who can identify that sort of thing and make sure it doesn't happen. So people who work more with astral energy, which would be like the angels and the ETs, it's a much higher vibration, so like outside of the earth plane vibration, they tend to hate density and the work that happens here on earth. So earth is extremely dense. I think a lot of people sign up to be here as humans and it sounds great when they do it, but then we get here and it's harder than we could possibly imagine to be here, to exist here, especially if it's really different from the place that your soul comes from. So I actually encounter that a lot in my work and in my mentorship, helping people cope with being on Earth because they just feel like they don't belong here, that it's too hard, it's too much all the time. And yeah, I totally get it. The second occasion where I encounter psychosis in the plant medicine space is if somebody needs to die over and over again. So the death rebirth thing is something I work with both in and out of this plant medicine ceremony space. And, for certain people and for certain cultures, I will say it's much more likely to happen in the plant medicine space. For example, When I work with someone from certain Asian cultures, I know that their ceremony is probably going to be pretty rough. And that's because there is so many cultural boxes, right? Think about all of the belief systems and boxes that people and things and concepts are put in certain cultures. Plant medicine's job is to open up doorways, perspectives, and lines of energy. And if there's too many boxes, that what needs to happen first is a destruction of the boxes, and that is usually brought on by death. And I have had instances where people are just dying over and over and over and over again because the constructs need to be broken down, and they're breaking them down on behalf of the culture. And so because they're part of the culture, right? They were raised in it, or it's just in their bloodline. It's just something that happens in ceremony sometimes. As a result, they come out feeling much more themselves, less restricted, less restrained. But the ceremony does tend to be a little unsettling to witness, for sure. But they rarely remember it as being unsettling. Um, Sometimes they do. It just depends on the person. It just depends on their path through the healing process. But whenever you have that much rigidity, things are going to be broken down and destroyed. Like that is medicine work. At least it is in the shaman realm. Not necessarily if you go work with psilocybin in the clinical space. You're dealing with a different container, different skill set of your practitioners. So they're coming in to die for themselves, but also for the collective. And, this is what we sign up for when we do medicine work is collective work, ancestrally, culturally, and so on. So the next type of people that have issues with psychosis during plant medicine ceremony are people on certain medications. And I gotta be honest, they are not always the kind of medications that we expect them to be. So I did have one instance of someone who was on a med that they lied to me about, and this is not even one that's contraindicated for psilocybin work, which is crazy to me. And they did have a full psychosis experience during the ceremony, um, and then they ended up kind of spiraling out over it. They are okay now, but this medication like really disconnected them from themselves. And yeah, when we do that, again, the plant medicine will amplify what's already there. So if you're taking a med that disconnects you from yourself, which let's face it, is most medication, because if your body is telling you something or your mental health is telling you something, and you're like, yeah, I'm going to take this medication to make it stop telling me something, you're disconnecting from yourself. Now, there's no judgment here. I think we all have periods of our life where we need the assistance of medication, and I'm not opposed to it in any way. But it is something that we need to be honest with ourselves about when it comes to doing this kind of work. It has happened in other occasions with different kinds of medications that were not psychiatric, but the same thing applies. There was a disconnection from the body using the medication and ended up going into a psychosis type loop during the ceremony experience. So, the third type of experience that I've seen psychosis in a plant medicine ceremony is with regard to a traumatic memory. So, this is what I would call looping. It is a form of psychosis. Sometimes people need to loop until it's clear. So, let's say you have a childhood experience that's like absolutely devastating. You are not processing it for whatever reason. There's a million reasons why we can't process our childhood trauma. Um, you can sit in a state of looping until you've experienced so many times that you're ready to let it go. And think about this in like real life. If we have something that happens to us that creates like a trauma that's stored in our body or a belief or a stuckness somewhere in us, and we're like, oh, we can't move forward from this, we will keep looping the experience in our day to day life. And so the same can happen in a plant medicine ceremony, except it takes that loop and it condenses it, and you experience it in like a 5-minute increment over and over and over again. So instead of experiencing it for the rest of your life, you get to do it in ceremony. Now you will continue to loop in this experience in ceremony until it's clear. The caveat to this is that people also loop when they aren't ready to face something, and they should not be in ceremony. And this is rarely something that you can identify just by doing an intake or talking to someone. Like, you have to be doing deep work with this person to see, oh, okay, they're actually not ready to face this trauma. And if I take them into a plant medicine space, they're just going to loop on the trauma over and over again, which is going to put them in a heightened state of trauma response that they may not be able to get out of. So if you have this experience in plant medicine and you're not ready to face it, and now you're in a looping situation, it can actually traumatize you to the point that you need a much different level of care afterwards in order to recover. So I'm going to share a couple important considerations when working with ceremony or in ceremony with mushrooms, with psychedelics, when considering hiring somebody to do this with you. The benefit of working with a shaman is that they can tether you, they can call you back, and they can see where you are. So, as a shaman, this place that you go when you're taking psychedelics is a place that I reach naturally, which means it makes me an awesome guide in that place. I can see where your spirit is, I can see where your body is, I can see what you need. Um, and that's a really handy tool to have when you're in that kind of space. And most other ways that psychedelics come through are very technical, very clinical. And so you're not going to get that kind of connection. And that can often be essential when we're dealing with a psychosis situation, is having someone that can call you back, that can tether, that can meet you in the other world and be like, hey, John, take my hand. We're coming back now. Um, I have had more than one occasions where I've had to go into the other world and retrieve somebody. And I do not even want to know what would happen if they did that in an environment where they didn't have anyone who could come and get them. Um, the other piece to that is gauging dosage. So you can't go that far in dose with certain people. You just can't. You will push them into psychosis. Um, and when I am discussing this with people, it's usually evident very quickly if they're like prone to psychosis in the medicine space. And that, again, that's the point of being a plant medicine woman, is to be able to identify these things. How likely is psychosis? Can you give them a heads up so they won't panic? Or is there something we can do to make sure it doesn't happen? Dosage is usually a big part of that. And the plant spirits, because I have such a deep relationship with them, they will warn me. They'll tell me either in the days leading up to meeting this person or after we've had like a consultation, hey, this person's going to go into psychosis. You need to give them a heads up. This is what you can do to help mitigate that situation or to help anchor them when it happens. So, working with too high of a dosage can actually send many people in psychosis. This idea, and I don't mean like positive, productive psychosis. I mean like not the great kind. Like, we're gonna inflict different kind of trauma on the person. The plants actually prefer to work at a lower dosage. They prefer to show you the subtler realms, which is where they live all the time. Um, because this is like, it's almost like practical to them. Like, hey, we want to show you where we are so that you can come back to us and navigate the different worlds on your own. Whereas if they send you out really far, a lot of times this is to satisfy the ego. Like, oh, I just want to know how the universe works. I want to know what it feels like to meet God. Like, okay. And how does that help you? How does that help the world? Is that based in your heart, or is that based in curiosity? Is it based for the need to explore? Now, again, these are just interesting questions to ask. Um, but the plants, as a spirit, they do prefer to work with the lower dosing. And I think most people, like, physically do not do well with a high dose. Also, there's an interesting thing that happens where the plants will not take you anywhere if you're not safe. So for some people, if they, let's say they want to take mushrooms on their own, um, and they have like a tendency to go into a psychotic state, the plants won't take them anywhere. I haven't figured out why they do this for some people and they don't do it for others, but if you're not in a safe space, they won't even take you into a ceremony. I think it has something to do with respecting the spirits in the other world, and they reciprocate in kind. So, another couple notes about this. Um, if someone has a psychosis experience and they're not properly supported, it can set a person back years if it's not done properly or in collaboration with the plants. And this is one of the greatest risks, in my opinion, outside of being traumatized by your facilitator, intentionally or not. This is one of the greatest risks of bringing psilocybin to the mainstreaming psilocybin. I think I did a podcast on that already. If a person isn't ready for the ceremony experience and they need to build like more rapport or clear out certain things first, they will likely have a psychosis experience if they're prone to it already. So this means like establishing solid rapport with the person who's walking you through the experience. Maybe we need to clear out this little trauma over here first, and then we can do ceremony and you won't have a psychosis experience. A lot of times there's things that you can do to prepare so that this doesn't happen. And again, that's why it's important to work with someone who can see that and identify that. Avoidance can cause psychosis at 100%. This is another one of those interesting facts about working with plant medicine is, first of all, the ego can override anything. If you have a super, super strong ego, you don't have to go to the places where you do work. You can bypass it, and you can you can also think you're not doing anything unhealthy because you'll have no idea. Your ego will just bypass the whole experience or control the whole experience. And avoidance can do the same thing with regards to psychosis. So if you're avoiding something that you really need to look at, you will get sent into psychosis. If a facilitator panics, it will compromise the container and it will cause trauma to imprint. So that panic, that anxiety, that inability to hold like a solid, safe container will be imprinted on the person on a much, much deeper level if that happens during a psychosis episode. And, if things happen that are not ideal or not what you would hope for, I do trust that there's a reason, and I trust that, every trauma is also a gift. And if there are certain things that we can learn, identify, or avoid, that's also great, right? And that's why I started this podcast, hoping to help the people who need it. So here is my mini rant, lecture, podcast piece about psychosis. If you have questions, if you encounter this, feel free to reach out. Happy to help. And today I'm also going to put a plug in about my Italy retreat. So I launched my first international retreat this year. It will be the last week of April 2025. It will be in Tuscany. And the theme of this retreat is quickly being revealed to me as death and rebirth. So, in signing up for a retreat with me, it would include numerous coaching leading up to and after the retreat process. There will be a lot of ceremony around death and rebirth and working with land spirits and kind of honing some psychic skills and learning how to cross over on your own, all while in the presence of Italy. We will have a private Italian chef. Everyone will get a massage and a horseback ride. There's 600 acres to explore. So it's a real mix of like doing deep personal work and a lot of pleasure. We're going to be doing wine tasting with a sommelier. Eating Italian food, like, come on, is there anything better than that? I'm really excited about this retreat, and I am hoping to do more international retreats as the years pass by. So, thank you for listening. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. If you enjoyed this podcast and want to know more about me and my work, you can find me at www.sacredheartshaman.com.